Good morning, good evening, and wherever the sun may find you. My name is Walt, and this is Coffee and Concepts on Keystroke Medium. Today, we are talking about something a little weird in the beginning and something we can all appreciate at the end, or at least I hope so. Otherwise, this will be a real short show. We are talking about tying it all together. Now, to start doing that, I wanted to kind of get into something that is a little weird in regards to coffee, and this might take some people by surprise. But you know something, you never know what you're going to get till you throw it out there. So that being said, tying things together. Sometimes certain things get mixed together and you don't really know how it's going to turn out. For example, when you start using like flavor shots or infusing coffee with different flavors, we talked about that last week, putting hazelnut or like French vanilla over a bean or baking it into the bean so that it has that flavor profile. But oddly enough, there are some people that go a step further, and they do beer. So the idea here is that you take a coffee roast that you really enjoy, and then during the brewing process for the beer, you mix those two together. What happened to my screen? There we go. Hey, Jay Clifton Slater. I appreciate you too. Thanks for coming out this morning. So when I'm not scribbling and slapping keys and trying to write all sorts of stuff in my alter ego, I work for a large beer distributor in an operations section. So one of the things that we kick out into the world is Founders Beer, and this is one of their brews. It's a breakfast stout. It's a double chocolate coffee oatmeal stout. From what I understand, it's absolutely fantastic, especially with like steak and eggs. The flavor profile of the beer actually takes some of the salt away, or takes a bite out of that salty profile of the steak. So really interesting. So it's kind of neat to see how different people play with coffee and can infuse candy effects in some instances, fruit style effects, or in the case of a beer like this, you're gonna want a stout beer, which is going to be less acidic. And it's not going to have that tang of like an IPA, an India Pale Ale, because it's not going to be it's not going to be fermenting for James McCormick late night. Woo! It's not going to be fermenting for so long that it creates that almost citrus profile. That's going to clash with the flavor profile of the coffee, which usually has an acidic taste to it. So you want to balance those flavors so that they work together and give you a smooth finish on the beer that you're drinking. And from what I understand, I haven't actually tasted this myself, but I understand it's pretty good. I got a lot of friends at work and some friends who were in the military with me who have had drink this and said that they really enjoyed it. So I have to take the word on it. But that kind of brings us into the topic for our concept for today, and that's tying things together. So yesterday was May the 4th. And we were or everybody was kind of talking Star Wars, because you have that whole "May the 4th be with you" kind of deal. And I'm a huge fan of Dave Filoni and his work on the animated stuff, both Star Wars Rebels and, of course, Star Wars Clone Wars. For a while, we really didn't have that much to kind of bridge things. When Disney was looking at purchasing Lucasfilm, and we got the Clone Wars as a result. Really, really, really cool storylines. Some of the seasons are better than others. One has a weird vibe to it because they were originally shown out of order. And then you have 4, which goes into really metaphysical concepts of the Force and all that stuff. But then you get seasons 5 through 6, which were pretty damn cool, and then you have 1, 2, and 3, which goes into some of the stuff with like deep into the Jedi and the Mandalorian stuff, and it was really well done. I enjoyed it. And recently, as part of the rollout of Disney Plus, they brought Dave Filoni and the cast back to do a final season of Clone Wars. Up until that point, what we had the Lost season or the Lost missions, and those were 6 completed episodes and a small spat of uncompleted episodes for when the series was canceled. So they decided to bring back the original cast and kind of weave together what storylines they figured would make a great final season and put that into play to finish things off and tie up loose ends and stuff like that. And minor spoilers, I'm not going to spoil the actual episodes, but just to give you, if you don't want to know anything and you have not seen it yet, or you don't have Disney Plus and don't have access to it, I'm not going to spoil the episodes, but I am going to tell you give you a little bit of background. I have a cat gripping a wire. So the first part of the season really kind of gives you a wider view of the clones and like how they perceive the war, the Clone Wars, and what they thought of it. And then on the other side, you get a look at one of the fan favorite characters, which is Ahsoka Tano, who was supposed to be Anakin's apprentice, and how it ties up her storylines, and then weaves that last narrative into the Revenge of the Sith movie. Really, really interesting the way they did it, and that kind of brings me to writing and how we kind of craft our stories to have a natural progression and kind of like a path that they follow. Even though, depending on the perspective of your characters, it might seem disjointed or it might seem very laser focused. As writers, we'd have a tendency to know where we want the story to go, even though it might take a winding path here or there to try and get there. In regards to endings and tying things together, the way the Clone Wars did it was that they had an overall ending for the Clone Wars that they kind of had in mind that we had seen years earlier. And then this series, much later on, maybe 20 years, 10, 15 years, 2001, 1999 maybe, when Star Wars Episode 1 came out. So almost 20 years later, and then they decide to finally tie up those loose ends and kind of revisit that story so that they can put a bow on it and finish it up for all time. In addition, so that kind of points at that one feature to say, I'm going to leave this open-ended. I'm going to revisit it at another time. So that's kind of what they did there. Then you have those writers who they write in tight arcs. So instead of like what Star Wars did, where I leave some things open-ended because I could revisit them in other media, or I'm going to leave this open-ended and leave it to interpretation. Some people who write in tight arcs, they write the beginning, the middle, and they throw out all these hints and speculations and plot threads. And by the end of, say, by the end of the book, by the end of the duology, by the end of the trilogy, they then take all of those threads, every single one, boss man Josh Hayes for Keystroke Medium with his giant legal pads. They go through all of them and say, I need to tie this one up, this one, this one, this one, this one, and they finish it all off, and there's nothing left hanging. So you have a complete story all in one. You're not waiting for anything. And then, of course, last you have that waiting for that interpretational ending, whereas kind of like Inception, they would, in order to tell whether or not they were inside of a person's dream, they would take a child's toy, a top, and they would spin it. And if it would wobble and fall over, they knew they were outside of the dream. If it maintained its spin, then they were still dreaming. And at the end, you see just like this little wobble. You don't see whether or not that thing actually falls over or not. It could fall over, it might not. In the 90s version of the Arnold Schwarzenegger movie, I never remember the name of the movie. I always remember the book title for the short story. We'll remember you for free, or we'll remember you for a price. Total Recall was the movie. They have this kind of ending where it could be still in the simulation. It might not be in the simulation. It's left up to the person to kind of figure that out. So the ending is left open. I think it's cool to have those open-ended finales where, you know, you kind of leave it to the reader, you leave it to the audience to say, hey, this is the way I interpret it, you know, and that's your headcanon, you know, your own particular take on the property, which can be enriching. But I think a lot of people like to have things tied up, and they like to have things finished off. And I think that that's the allure of coming back and revisiting series. And I think that that's also the allure of why we enjoy sequels so much, is if anything is left open-ended in a first book, a first property, a first cat, we like those things tied up. So we like going back to that property and seeing what happened after the initial events finished. And how they kind of played out in the lives of the characters. So today we explored 3 types of tying up your threads, your paths, your endings. You know, we talked about the tight script that ties everything up. We talked about the loose script that leaves some things open so it can be revisited later. And then we talk about the open-ended that leaves it to the mind of the imagination in the audience and or reader, so that you can take from it what you will. Really appreciate you coming out today. So the happy ending, Jay Clifton Slater says, what happy ending are you talking about, Jay? So we really appreciate you coming out today. Make sure you visit Josh, Scott, and Chuck on Keystroke Medium Live, which has now moved to Monday mornings at, I believe it's 10:30 Eastern. It's so new. I can't even focus. We have Lauren and Kayleen on Thursdays doing the Writer's Journey, where they explore topics that are of keen interest to people getting into the writing game, or those who have been in the writing game and want to improve their game. You have obviously Coffee and Concepts, 7:30 a.m. on Tuesday mornings, and then long form storytelling from Josh Gayu, where he delves into long interviews with creators on their particular points of view on a particular subject. Don't forget to check out Keystroke Medium's live reads with Kayleen Williams. And that's going to be it for me. We're tying it up, we're drinking coffee, and we're putting it to bed. Thank you very much for reading, writing, and a little bit more. We'll catch you next time on Keystroke Medium.